So, Dr. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a long time planning this one. I really, really appreciate your patience in organising this. I know it's obviously difficult to find a time and come in, and I couldn't think of anyone better to have this conversation with today. It's one we've not managed to have so far on the podcast, and I couldn't think of anyone better than yourself to go through the history of the gender pain gap. I read your article earlier, which your most recent one, which was amazing. And I know obviously with your other experiences, including sitting on the board at Clue, we're going to have a great chat about some menstrual cycle tracking topics, which is really important because I see a little bit of resistance there at the moment due to maybe some of the stuff that we're seeing in the news. So I'm excited to unpack that with you. But before we get into all of that, let's tell the listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself, your backstory, qualifications, and how we've ended up here today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. As you said, it's been a little bit of time waiting to get here, but I am, like you, very pleased that we finally got round to it. To kick off a bit about me, that's always what people ask, don't they? And it's always like, okay, how do I condense everything I've done into a short and interesting review of things? But I like to think about how I've got to where I've got to today is very much a career in two halves. I'm always have been, and I always will be, fundamentally a scientist. And that to me is just being super curious and wanting to know why. And then comes the medicine part and being a doctor of saying, okay, now we know why, how can we make it better? So that's really me in a nutshell. And then what that led me to do is in the first half of my life, it was concentrating on medicine. So the whole med school straight through to qualifying as a doctor, working the wards in hospitals, working out in GP, and trying to determine where's the best place to go. And I just really loved obstetrics and gynecology. And I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily go into that field seeing it as a focus because I had a deep, deep passion in women's health. I just was attracted to the type of medicine and the science that sat behind obstetrics and gynecology. I definitely saw that there was still a lot unknown, and therefore I thought, this is really great. There's a lot more to understand, a lot more to research. And what I really loved about obstetrics and gynecology, which comes to my future points, is that it covers so many different bits. Obstetrics, we're thinking about pregnancy, we're thinking about the health of the mum and the health of the baby. In gynecology, where we think about women's health, more than just reproductive health, but if we focus in on that, we're thinking about gynae cancers, we're thinking about lack of periods, painful periods, infertility, urogynae, so difficulty with the bladder, prolapse, etc. So it covers a whole spectrum. But looking back, even when I was doing that, and I worked for the NHS specialising in obs and gynae for well over a decade, I never really saw myself as working in women's health. I just saw that this is what I did. I didn't really think about it in that way. And then in the latter years, I started to think very much about, I love doing my clinical work. I love seeing patients face to face. It's fantastic to be able to understand where somebody is coming from. And as I said, I'm curious and I love to problem solve. So I had that every single day with every single patient I saw, and I loved it. But I started to see that I was saying the same thing to different people, but again and again and again. And 1 month was the same as the next month, which was the same as the next year. And 5 years down the line, I thought, we're going through generations and we're still seeing generational problems, and this isn't good enough for me. And so I really wanted to step out of that and move into something that was bigger. So it felt natural to move into public health, where we're looking at the health of a nation, the health of a population. And I worked there for a number of years at Public Health England, did a lot of stuff. But then I was just like, there's some areas I haven't looked at, and I really want to dive into those a bit deeper. So that was really the bridge of moving into the second half of my life. And that was focusing around health, but more from a commercial business innovation point of view. And a bigger part of that was obviously health tech. And I started quite general as a clinician moving into health tech. And then I actually was like really missing the women's health part. And that's where I started to develop this understanding that I had been working in women's health. It's a massively underserved, undermet area of healthcare. It needs a lot of research, a lot of money, a lot of expertise. We've got a long way to go. And so that brought me to thinking, I'm going to focus in on that. And that's really where I am now, that I bring very much my clinical understanding and the science and medicine that sits behind that in women's health. And I've moved that into a much more innovation, education and implementation of what can we do. And ultimately where I am now is moving, progressing and improving the standard of women's healthcare. That's all I care about. And I can see that can be done in lots of different ways, and it has to be done. We can't just rely on the earlier version of me as an obstetrician and gynecologist and say it all just sits on that gynecologist. It doesn't. There's so many players in this, and that's where I try to work across that ecosystem in women's healthcare, and everything, at the heart of it is improving the standard of women's healthcare, for sure.
That was so cool. You definitely did a great job of making it very interesting. I love how everything's kind of come back full circle to women's health. But I mean, there's so many really fascinating things you said in there that I want to unpack. But one thing that I find really interesting is how you said that you were working in women's healthcare, but you didn't really know or refer to it as women's healthcare, right? It's just healthcare.
Yeah.
And I believe it was you that said that in a blog that I read a little while back, which was like, eventually at some point in the future, we probably need to move. It just needs to not be referred to as women's healthcare. It's just healthcare.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting because I'd only ever heard it referred to as women's healthcare or femtech, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that actually, as silly as it sounds, but the idea that actually it's just healthcare. And then it really kind of begs the question, okay, well, if it is just healthcare and we live in England and we've got the NHS, why do we not have this standardized, uniformed approach to healthcare? Why do women receive worse waiting times, worse diagnostic times? Why are they listened to less? I mean, there's so much to unpack there. There's so many questions, but yeah, just find it really interesting that you were like, I was working in women's healthcare, without even really referring to it as women's healthcare. Now we have this term femtech, which is only a handful of years old, and that's, it's just very interesting how that landscape is moving.
Definitely. And I think, actually, I've never thought about it until you just said it, but yeah, very much like what I've personally experienced of not thinking I work in women's healthcare, and now very much being, I work in women's healthcare, but we need to get to a place where we just call it healthcare, is that cycle there. When we're at med school, we're taught medicine, and nothing is differentiated between men and women. Nothing.
Which is crazy, isn't it?
And so, and I just want to say, like, as a kind of caveat to what I'm just going to talk about, I know that there's an awful lot of girls and women who are listening to this and will have had a horrendous experience. And I don't want anyone to think that I am reducing that experience at all. But in my experience, from what I do when I've practiced clinically and the colleagues I've worked with, no one's gone into women's healthcare with a vendetta or a deliberate want to ignore women, not listen to them, dismiss them, give them the wrong medication, give them the wrong advice. I know that does happen, but I think it's much rarer than perhaps we talk about. I think it's more of a ignorance, a lack of awareness, a lack of education, a misunderstanding and a misinformation. I don't think there's a deliberate vendetta there at all. And it's then a question of, okay, so how did we get to where we are? And that's where I'm saying, like at med school, we're all we're learning, we're blank canvases, and it's not being pulled out there that, look, hold up, there's a difference here. There's a difference that when you see a woman with chest pain to when you see a man with chest pain, there is a difference. You need to think about different things. You need to do different types of investigations. You need to consider different diagnoses. You need to look at different types of management. That is not how it happens. And so obviously, when you move that medical student forward to qualifying as a doctor and then moving forward, and they may work in A&E, they may work as a GP, they may work as an obstetrician and gynecologist like myself, you have to think that this is the basis that they came from. So this is why there is a lack of understanding and a lack of awareness. It's not right. It definitely is not right. But I just want to explain that that's where people are coming from. Now, there's lots of, and we can dig deeper into why is that, and there's lots of reasons. But I think the important bit at this stage is to say, we need to acknowledge that the healthcare that we are taught and we teach others within the medical profession as healthcare professionals, not just to doctors, to nurses, to physios, to occupational therapists, across the whole range of healthcare professionals, what we are teaching is non-sex differentiated medicine, and that is a problem. And when we talk about healthcare overall, what we're actually talking about is healthcare for males. And what we don't have, and we're trying to scrabble around with very little resource, fantastic work, fantastic people, but it's the lack of resource that means that everything is so slow and everything is quite fragmented. And so we've got great bits of work here and there, but we're not really having the impact that we need to. And so where we need to get to is a place where we do see that, you know, males and females are different. They've got different diagnoses. They've got different presentations of symptoms and signs, and they need different management. But to be able to get there, we're not going to be able to do that overnight. And so I think where I'm trying to put us in a place is to kind of show how the differences are so that people recognise that there is a need for difference, with the hope that when we've done the work, then we can join this all back together, and that's where it will become healthcare, and we will understand that there are differences. And, you know, obviously, as I said at the beginning, what is the heart of my work is improving the standard of women's healthcare. But, you know, I am not in any way stating that the difference between males and females is the only difference that exists in healthcare. There is a lot of other issues around age, a lot of issues around race and ethnicity, which we don't pick up at all. And all of these areas need to be looked at again, and we need to go through. But just as an example of what I'm talking about is that because, you know, we were talking about this a moment ago about when women were allowed to be in clinical trials. So the regulator in the US is the FDA, and they had stated up until 1993, which blows my mind because, you know, that's when I'm at secondary school doing my A-levels kind of thing, heading into a medical school. And they still haven't got women in clinical trials. They've stated, you know, up until 1993, women couldn't be part of clinical trials. And again, that wasn't done in a negative way. It was done with the belief that there was a concern over women could be pregnant, as in the women who were participating could be pregnant, and we wouldn't want to be doing testing on women who were pregnant. Now, obviously, there's like ways to determine if someone's pregnant, so there is a workaround, but it became too difficult. I think there was probably more nuance to that. There was the fact that we didn't really appreciate, and we were concerned, and I say we as like the scientific body, were concerned about how the hormones, for example, the biology would have a play when you're looking at whether this drug's going to work or not. And so it was deemed in some camps to be easier, in inverted commas, to say, well, just don't have women included. And then obviously the tide changed, and it was like, look, we're missing out a massive amount, and we can't assume what we see in a man is going to be what we see in women. So there was a big change in 1993, and women were able to participate in clinical trials. But what we have is like all of this evidence and this data, this understanding that's happened previous to 1993 has put us in a position to say, okay, well, this drug in the pharma industry, when we took it to a clinical trial, let's say in 1990, it didn't work. So it's not going to work for like diabetes. I'm just making this as an example. And you're like, okay, fine, doesn't work. That's it. You know, back to the drawing board or whatever. And that gets thrown out. There are all these drugs that have been tested, but only been tested in men for conditions that exist in men and women, such as diabetes. And it's just like, oh, do you not think we should go back round and test these all again in women? Because maybe it doesn't work in men, but it could work in women. These are like the fundamental differences that you're like, there's so much opportunity here. We've missed so much. But I tried to just say, we can't change the past, we can change the future. So let's look at this in a positive light. Let's look at the opportunity. What are we doing with regard to this? And then that's when it then gets on my nerves, I'll be honest, when people go, you know, women's health is just so niche. I'm like, how is half of the population niche? And the fact is that if you were just commercially minded and just thinking about market size and just thinking about return on investment, if I said to you everything that we already have and we've taken to a point in the pharma industry within clinical trials and we just haven't tried on half of the population, then that makes some really good maths there. And if you want to call that girl maths, I'm quite happy to fly the flag of girl maths. I blooming love maths. And that's really good maths. And if you don't think that that's an opportunity, then you need to relook at how you're gauging whether something's an opportunity or not. So, 2024 was definitely the year that I decided that I'm really going to knock that women's health is niche, that we're just knocking that on the head. And now wherever I post in social, it's hashtag women's health is not niche. It's just like, we've got to change this idea, because for too long we have assumed that when we talk about healthcare, that must have encompassed healthcare for women, and our knowledge and our understanding was all about healthcare for women. But in actual fact, because of that history, it's predominantly been healthcare understanding and knowledge creation within a man, and then assumed that carried over to women. That isn't the case. We now are seeing really good evidence, and we have been for many years, but we're starting to really gather momentum here and making change. And when you see things like the White House initiative that's saying, actually, this is massively an under-resourced area, we don't know what we're doing. And we know that we don't know what we're doing because when you look at the outcomes, when you look at morbidity, when you look at mortality, we know that there is a deficit in women against men. So there's something not happening. There's something not working. Something's not right. We need to look at that. And I love the way that they're going right back to the drawing board and saying, we need to start with, at the beginning of this cycle, our understanding, and therefore let's look at the research and let's put money, and hopefully a lot of money, into research, and we'll then run out from there. But that's what we need.
I love that. There's so much I want to unpack there, which is amazing. You've done a brilliant job of kind of describing the history of the problem, that women weren't included in research and why that was. And my understanding is that there's quite a big lag time between research being conducted, conclusions being drawn to the point where they're then obviously being taught, and then that obviously education feeding into what, the application and public knowledge, right? And that lag time can be 10 years, 20 years.
I mean, so I would work on 20 years from bench to accepted within the scientific medical arena. So when I worked at Cancer Research UK, I headed up their research strategy, and it was like, what should we be looking at now? What should we be funding at lab? I talk about like bench research, but it doesn't necessarily happen at a bench. But, what should we be looking at from discovery side of research? Because it's going to be a problem in medicine, and there's going to be what we talk about burden of disease. So a lot of people are going to be struggling with this problem, whatever the problem is. What's going to be that problem in 20 years' time? Because that's roughly, on average, the time that we're looking at. Obviously, it can take a lot longer, but that's just 20 years to doctors knowing about it and talking about it. Then I would put easily another 10 years onto that with regard to a doctor talks about it, but a person is aware of it in their normal day-to-day life. There is enough understanding, like where we talk about, if we ask the kids now, what do they know about smoking? They know it. The vast majority is, we know smoking's not good. We know it's bad for our health. We know it leads to lung cancer. And it's interesting to see how things are developing with regard to vaping and stuff at the moment. It's really interesting to see that behavioural science. And we have to take that into consideration. It isn't just saying we need to understand what's going on. It's that implementation. And if we don't think about the implementation, we might as well not really bother with the understanding, because you've got to complete that cycle to have an impact.
Yeah, completely agree. So if we kind of take 1993 as the point where women started to be included in research, 30-ish years ago, and we have kind of at least a 20-year lag time, then that really kind of sets the tone for what the problem is here.
Yeah. So where that puts really, we've only really been able to increase our understanding in the women's health area, roughly speaking, in the last 10 years. And if you think of a field, if you say we've only been looking at cancer for 10 years, that's just so young, so young. So I think, this is an exploding area, and I'm so excited for that. And I'm definitely, like yourself, we're all on that ride, and we're trying to push that wave as much, forward as much as possible. And there's so many great people are doing that. And that's the wonderful thing, that, there is so much interest in this. And I think probably it is successful with the very little resources that we've had so far, because women are feeling like someone is speaking to what they've been experiencing, what they experience now, but also what they experienced. Maybe they saw their older sister, and then what they felt when they were a young kid, and what they saw their mum go through, and what they saw their grandma go through, or their aunt, or whatever. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying, in any woman's life right now, I'm 42. I can, think back of the last 30 years, and it's not just my experience. It's all of my friends and families, on top of everything I've seen clinically. But I'm excited. I'm really excited. I look forward, and I look at my daughters, and they're very young, in the sort of around the age of 10, and they've got this all ahead of them. But they are so much more informed than I was. I mean, mainly I do kind of question it sometimes, because some of my mates are like, you really talk to your kids about that? And I'm like, hell yes, I do. They need to know about it all. And I would love them to do that. But, I do get that they get a slightly different view having as mum, as a gynecologist. But I'd like to think that becomes quite default. And there's some great people out there doing some great work with regard to that. And if we build generations of girls and boys, it's so essential. It's about population health as well as that individual person's health. If we build that generation where people are more informed, then they will be more empowered, and so they will be able to advocate for themselves. And I find advocacy is quite a loaded term in medicine. My experience is often people have said that person couldn't advocate for themselves, as though there's been a wrongdoing there. And so often that has been the situation. But actually, in my experience, what I felt when I was seeing patients is, if somebody could come to me and say, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what I'm worried about, what might be going on, this is how I would like my life to be, or, I'd like this pain to stop, or I'd like to be able to do this, or whatever, then I think that's advocacy. And that helps me. We're doctors, we are not magicians. And so I don't know what you're thinking, and I definitely don't know that in a 10-minute consultation time, especially when you're feeling nervous, understandably, and you're feeling worried, understandably, as well as there being a massive stigma and taboo around things. So if somebody could walk in and then tell me, this is what my period is like, and I don't like that, and I know it shouldn't be like that. That's what I'm telling my daughters. I'm saying, biologically, your period will be painful, but this is not a situation that you have to accept. It is common. It is not so normal, so that you feel that you have to accept it. And that is how I am teaching them. And that is what I think will make a massive difference to that generation going forward. We, and I put myself in this group, we have used normal in women's healthcare for too long. It's normal for labour to be painful. It's normal for your periods to be painful. It's normal for you not to want to have sex. It's normal for you to be incontinent after you've given birth. All of this is normal, so go away. It's not a problem. Accept it and carry on with life. If you put all of that out to your child or to a man, that's not normal. Nobody would think that's normal. But it's just accepted practice. When you give birth, many people become incontinent. Yes, biologically, we understand the mechanism of why that's happened, but that doesn't make it acceptable for that. I mean, if the woman's happy, that's absolutely fine. I'm not saying that a woman should not be happy. I personally don't think that's a quality standard that we should be reaching for, but I'm not advocating that everybody needs everything sorted. But what I'm trying to say here is that you shouldn't be, if you think it's a problem and you should know that a change like that is a problem, then there's something that can be done about it. And I could go on and on about incontinence. It's a real bugbear for me because there is a certain brand that advertises very widely, especially to women in the fitness industry, because their adverts include women in the gym lifting weights. And they say you have a problem leaking, that's especially worse when you lift weights. Yes, we know that because you're putting force on the pelvic floor. And I know that you've had Baz Moffat. I love her so much. And she's just like my pelvic floor buddy. Like, we really rant on about this. But basically it's like, yeah, we get it. You're putting more force on the pelvic floor when you're lifting weights. But if you are leaking urine at that point, the answer is not to buy a pad to absorb urine. The answer is to identify that this is a problem, and if you want something to be done about it, there is a treatment for it. And actually, when you go to gynecology and you go to urogynecologists, they're saying, how are these adverts okay? Because it's suggesting that this is normal and acceptable, that you leak urine. And this is not something that you need to accept as a woman. This is something that can be managed. And, you know, when we're looking at, we can put somebody on the moon, but we're just going to say to women, oh, you know, if you now leak urine, that's just on you go. I'm like, excuse me?
And a woman wrote the code for that, right?
Yeah.
Put us on the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just saw recently somebody, I can't think who had put it out there, so I don't want to put it down to the wrong person who put it out there. It's great, so I really want to give praise where it's due, so apologies for not looking into it. But there was a great thing at the moment saying how much the government is investing in potholes.
Potholes, I saw that.
Versus how much they're putting into women's health.
Yeah.
So the numbers are like, 25 million for a women's health strategy. And that, when they say strategy, they also mean not just come up with a plan, implement it and improve the standard of care, all under 25 million. But they're how much are they putting by a factor of 10?
I'm sure it said 2 billion, didn't it?
Oh, no, it can't be.
No, that does
I mean,
sound
there are
high.
an awful lot of potholes, to be fair.
Well, the next slide was the comparison between the amount of women and the amount of potholes, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, like, even if they said, like, it's 250 million, so it's increased by a factor of 10, in potholes. Now, potholes cause a lot of damage. But as I said to my husband, you know, damage to my car is far easier to fix and far less problematic than damage to my body and to my mind. It's just like, where is the head at here? Where are the priorities at? And I actually still to this day, I don't fully understand. I don't know whether in this instance, the government is choosing to ignore it or whether they think it is already covered within the realms of everything that they're putting into healthcare. And this is where I'm really trying, along with some other great people, to say what we do in healthcare does not trickle down into improving the standard of women's healthcare, because it's all pushed towards building on the knowledge that we have in men. And that's the ultimate problem here.
Hey, it's Leo here. Just very quickly interrupting this podcast episode to share with you a really exciting announcement. The Nexus team are now available to take on new one-on-one online nutrition clients. So if you're interested in working with myself or anyone on the team for your nutrition, health, or body composition-based goals, then follow the link in the show notes and you can see all of the information on what that might look like to work with us.
Let's say, because the problem is multifaceted.
Yeah.
You know, there is probably an element of responsibility on multiple people involved. So I obviously had Bridget on last week, which was a really great chat to kind of go through the work she's doing on this at the moment. But let's say 30, 40 years down the line, with money not really being an object, you could wave your magic wand. What would the system look like in an ideal world to support women properly?
God, that's a massive question.
It is a very big question.
I think, and this is not going to be a comprehensive answer, and I'll probably walk out of here and think, oh, I should have said this as well. But the biggest thing that I speak about, and I kind of have as my, I suppose, North Star to work towards, is that if at the level of the healthcare professional, when you're sitting in your GP surgery, you're sitting in A&E, you're running a clinic in dermatology or whatever, you're actually mentally clocking that there is a difference when you walk in as a man and I walk in as a woman. Yeah, I know we already think like that, but the fact is that mentally we clock it in, and it's reinforced by the fact that when you pull up that patient's details on the electronic patient record, you've actually got completely different set of questions that you're asking, a completely different set of parameters with regard to the blood investigations you do, completely different set of science that we will have researched and determined to understand that actually if you are on the oral contraceptive pill, and if it is combined or not combined, if you are on HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and taking estrogen and progesterone and maybe testosterone, whatever the mixture of all of this, what is your base level? That is a significant part of your hormones, but that isn't the only thing. That I now need to interpret everything you say from the very beginning of this is what the problem is, or this is what I wanted to see a doctor today about. That base level is acknowledged and is acknowledged to be different, and we work from basically a different platform. And then I think, yeah, that would be a massive achievement, because to get that to a place that's been implemented, so many of those, as you say, other players in this will have had to have come on board and recognise that we're not yet doing what we need to be doing and helping us get to that point. So I feel that would be a real milestone that, we can look back and go, yeah, to get there, we've had to get everything, and it will be a much better place to have got there. And I think the other side of it that's really important is it's not only the healthcare professionals, but that person themselves walking in and knowing that there will be a different system and there will be a different view of them because that they're female, and there's a recognition and the questions that they're being asked and the checks of like, can I just check where you are in your cycle? Can I just check where, how many children you've had? We understand all of this and the significance of all of these factors so much more, that now someone's coming primed, ready to give all of that information. And so that's why, I know we're going to talk about, but that's why things like the period trackers, that's the beginning of that, from that much more consumer patient side of things.
No, I love that. I love the first part. I mean, I love both parts of that answer, but the first part in particular, I love just because it's kind of what I try to do at the moment is, and often female clients, they'll complete my onboarding process and they will be like, why are some of these questions relevant? Mm-hmm. Why are you asking if I'm on birth control? What one, as you said, is it combined? Is it androgen based? Am I on HRT? Do I not have a cycle? Whatever that might be. And even if the answers to those questions don't directly influence what is in my scope of practice as a nutritionist, as an exercise professional, they're still really useful for me to have an understanding of where this person's at. And I think that having a relatively basic understanding of kind of zooming out and painting this picture of, okay, you're on this type of birth control, or you don't have a menstrual cycle, what other symptoms are you experiencing that are also flagging up on the form? And it might be chicken and egg, what comes first, correlation, causation. It's not my place to diagnose, but by zooming out and looking at this from a more holistic approach and asking over 100 questions as opposed to the 10-minute consultation you get, it has allowed me to look at clients and go, there's something that's not right here, and this is potentially part of the puzzle. Many clients have gone back to their doctor. That's been what has facilitated them having a conversation, and further down the line, they have been diagnosed with autoimmune or, Hashimoto's. They have changed the birth control and had less side effects due to that, or they have removed the hormonal birth control and they've got the coil. And because there is such, and because this is the pushback I often get, right, it's not your job to do that as a personal trainer and nutritionist. I'm like, well, it needs to be someone's job.
Yes.
And if no one else is doing it, and I feel like I have just enough understanding to, and I really try and downplay how much I know, but I know a little bit, right? To look at a client's health forms, look at what they're telling me, look at what's going on, potentially look at some actual data, some metrics. Where's your blood pressure? Where's your blood sugar? It would be, I would be doing them a massive disservice if I didn't go, something's wrong here. I actually saw a really great post about this the other day, and the coach was like, if someone comes to me and they want to lose 10 pounds and I just clearly see all of these other issues that this client is experiencing and I ignore them because they've come to me to lose 10 pounds, I'm doing them a disservice. Like you as the doctor, if they come to you and go, okay, well, I've got headaches, and you go, oh, well, I can also see this symptom, or I'm getting this, or I think this might be happening. You don't just go, oh, well, you didn't come to me for that.
Yeah.
You still have that conversation, right? So
exactly.
Looking at a client and going, okay, kind of what hormonal state are you in? Are you highly stressed? Are you under eating? Have you got HA? You know, you're missing your cycle. Whatever that might be, that is so important for me as a fitness professional and nutritionist. And I would absolutely love to see that kind of screening process be the default in the fitness industry, which is why we're trying to build it, and actually in healthcare, so that, you know, if you are sitting there as a woman, that whether you have PCOS or you don't, or you're on birth control, you don't, or you're on HRT, of course that is the foundation of where your internal hormonal profile is set. So then why is the conversation about your health not coming from that personalized starting point? It blows my mind that it's not already, but I love that that's part of your answer as to where hopefully we'll end up.
It has to be, doesn't it? And, you know, I think you captured it really well by saying that what you're doing is understanding where someone is, you know, and building that picture. And I think we've just missed completely the complexity of people. And this goes across men and women. And, you know, often there is a pushback, I find, where people say, yeah, but, you know, this isn't happening in men's health and that. And I've said, well, I never said it was great. I've just, that's not the area I'm working in. It doesn't mean I don't care about it and I don't think it's important. It's just that's not where my focus area is. And I'm, you know, spent a long time, I've spent all of my career in women's health, and I understand women's health. And there's still a lot more to know and a lot more dots to connect, for sure. But that's just where I'm working. And if I was working in men's health, or if I was working in space, you know, you understand your field. I wouldn't start to say that everything else is fine and this is the only one that's not fine. So I find that isn't really an argument. That doesn't have legs. So that just needs to be dismissed. But I think it's really important that you say it's about a picture, because you can't have any impact. And at the end of the day, all of this in health and well-being and in fitness, you're not doing anything useful if you don't have an impact. Everybody's coming to you with a problem, and so you need to solve that problem for them and have an impact. And how on earth, it's like trying to build a jigsaw puzzle where you're blindfolded, your hands are tied, and then even if you eventually somehow to do it, and, you know, the lights are off and somehow you do it, they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, like half of the pieces are missing. But yeah, if you could just make a nice picture, and you're like, and that's where we are at the moment. And so it is about trying to bring on all these pieces in a different way. And I love the fact that you are interested in it, but more so that you're actually doing something. And I completely disagree with people who say that is not your job, because for two reasons. One, you're only going to improve things if you don't work in a siloed fashion, and you don't say, no, leave that to me because I'm a doctor, or leave that to me because I'm a physiotherapist, or whoever it be. We can't cover everything, as we just said, and so you have to rely on a team approach. And more so, ultimately it comes down to that person, whether that person is a person going to you within the fitness space, or whether that person is coming, you know, to a doctor as a patient. You know, however they are and whatever they are, that person, it starts with them. They've got the problem and they need a solution, and they're looking for an effective treatment, management, intervention, impact, whatever. But if you basically, you know, say, oh no, it can only be across the healthcare professionals, or even then limit it further and say it can only be across doctors, for example, that's not actually the trend. That's not the way that people access health and well-being and fitness information and services. They access it partly through healthcare, but they do more and more through consumer-facing approaches, whether that be for services and for products. And so if you don't meet people where they are, then they're not going to come and meet you. You know, if somebody is going on, you know, Google and searching their symptoms, and they read something and that sends them to you from a fitness point of view, that person is perhaps very unlikely to have ever gone to their GP, because that's where their mindset is at the moment. Whereas if they can meet you and you can build up a picture of where they are, and we all have a duty to be signposters. I know what I know and I know what I don't know, and that stops me from being dangerous. So if I have identified something which I don't know, I'm going to tell you the right places to go. And you might take a bit of a time, it might be a bit of a journey, but I'm not going to pretend ever. We all have a responsibility to know that what are our limits of our ability. That's where the health and wellness industry gets a lot of negative issues, because people work outside of what they can really understand, and they try to pretend that they know more than they do. And that's where there's a problem. And that unfortunately does happen a lot within the women's health space. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all be, we've got to aim to be working in the right way. We shouldn't change our way of working and lower our expectations purely because some people are basically bad eggs and doing something not right. We've got to push for the positive, and be aware of the negative, but not build a whole community that is just about how to stop bad eggs doing the things they're going to do, because they're going to do it anyway, and we're going to really lower the ambition, and I'm not in for that at all.
No, I love that. Something I really want to emphasize that you've said for any fitness professionals listening is meeting people where they're at. And I love that phrase. We've actually got a slide on our pitch deck which says that. And this is exactly how I explain it. It's like a lot of people aren't going to the doctors, right? Blanket statement.
Exactly.
You also then layer in that you can't go to the doctors as a woman for a problem that you don't know is a problem because you believe it to be normal. It's common, but it's not normal. You've obviously done an amazing job of explaining that already, right? The most common examples being period pain, cramps, migraines. So these women aren't going to the doctors people aren't going to the doctors in general. You also can't go for a problem that you don't know is a problem because you've labelled it as normal. However, if your body is resulting in those health-based symptoms, you're potentially having them as a result of living not the healthiest lifestyle, which also potentially means you're not eating great, you're not exercising. So subsequently, somewhere down the line, you quite possibly decide that you want to work on your fitness or your strength, or you might want to lose a bit of weight or whatever. So then who do you go to for a fitness, nutrition, weight loss based goal? You go to the personal trainer and the nutritionist. So it's exactly that. I'm meeting these people where they're at. If you are all of the amazing companies in the femtech space, they're doing incredible things, but you can only market to people that already are looking for a solution to that problem, which really narrows down who you're talking to. Whereas most women, rightly or wrongly, have some sort of health, fitness, weight loss, toning up kind of goal, right? And I'm not saying that's correct. Diet culture is a whole nother conversation, but most of them do. So if they're looking for that and they're coming to me, then I owe it to them to also have the knowledge of the other areas that could be going on with their health, and then take them on that journey, which of course always results in referring out. But it's often I just know just enough to feel like I'm informing them on their symptoms maybe not being normal, connecting the dots as to why that might be, and then helping them, as you said earlier, just advocate, which is so important. I think I've only ever had, I've said this a couple of times on the podcast, but I've only ever had 2 female clients come to me that knew they had endometriosis. I've had 4 that had never heard of it. 18 months later, give or take, 2 years later, they've got an endometriosis diagnosis. But if they hadn't have gone through my onboarding process, if I just done a standard, this is a very narrow health and fitness onboarding process because this is my scope, I never would have asked them about the period pain, the painful intercourse, the other symptoms of endo. I wouldn't have asked them about immune system based symptoms, about gut health based symptoms, and subsequently kind of painted this picture of there's something going on here, which allowed them to advocate for themselves, have the confidence to have that conversation, get the referral, have the relevant testing, and subsequently, oh yeah, I've got endometriosis. That's life changing for that woman.
Massively.
So you are doing women a massive disservice if you are a fitness professional. And I feel like if you look at the adoption curve, right, I feel like the reason that this stuff sounds so crazy is that we're just so far over here. And I feel like in 10, 20 years, the standard approach in the fitness industry and the medical industry will of course be incredibly different, and then it'll be like, oh yeah, they were right. But now it's just because the adoption isn't there, the approach isn't tailored based on gender. It kind of sounds a bit crazy that we're saying that drugs have never been tested in women but they react differently. Like if you were telling me this 5 years ago, I don't think I'd be able to host this podcast, because I'd just be like, this doesn't make sense in my brain.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm always so keen to really try and listen to like your stories, patient stories, and what is the history of the problem, so that for anyone listening that is like, it just sounds almost too ridiculous, they can be like, okay, well, like, I now get why this problem has occurred.
Yeah, massively. And I think, I suppose I come at it, you know, there's two prongs to this. There's one which is you know, in what you offer, that you're providing a safety net to say, look, I don't have to know everything. Nobody knows everything, but I know what I know, as I say, and I know what I don't know. And I'm just going to pull out some things that sound like a red flag and probably direct you to where you should probably go and have it looked at. But the other thing, so safety is paramount, and we, you know, very much as a doctor at my heart, you know, it's to never do any harm, for sure. But the other side of this is that ultimately, you know, and I say this a lot, you know, now I run my company and I'm advising startups in the women's health space, and actually that's grown. A lot more companies are wanting to come on board in the women's health space with products and services, which is all great, and I do what I can to try and make it as successful as possible. But the one thing that I say again and again and again is, if you just concentrate on delivering something that is effective, success will come. In whatever measure you measure your success will come. If you just have that as the one thing you need to do, is this going to be effective for a woman? And then, so when you're saying about, if someone's coming with a fitness goal and you don't meet them where they are, how on earth are you ever going to be successful? How are they ever going to be successful? You know, and I know because of previous conversations, you talk a lot about like, how much time have you got to put to this? When's a good time for you to do? What are the other stresses you have going on in your life? You know, it's like there's exercise, but then there's also the eating, for example, and they go, you know, they're like yin and yang. And like, if you're doing a great workout, but you're not feeding your body in the right way, you're not going to be as successful. So I feel like we are within health and well-being and fitness overall. We are becoming much more attuned to this. We think about the role of mental health, for example, and we understand about mental well-being. I think that this is just, we're at the very early stage to think that, okay, how you feel about yourself will affect your performance in the gym. What you've eaten, how you've slept will affect your performance in the gym. Where you are in your cycle, whether you're perimenopausal or not, whether you're postmenopausal, whether you've just given birth, whether you're in the early stages of pregnancy, all of those bits will also equally affect somebody in the gym on that day. But also the key thing about fitness is consistency. So when you see that actually biologically you do not have a stable consistency biologically because you're going through hormone cycle, and that you are, even if you're going through 9 months of pregnancy, your pregnancy hormones are not consistent. They're not stable. They're changing as you go through the different weeks of the pregnancy. If you're in perimenopause, they are definitely not stable. You've got massive fluctuations. That's what gives rise to all of your symptoms. You know, if we look at hot flushes, it's because you've got these high swings and very low troughs of estrogen throughout perimenopause that your brain literally needs to adapt to. And when it adapts to the current level of estrogen, it swings again. And that's what's giving you these very different signals to your brain that is leading to these hot flushes, because you're feeling hot because your body is sensing you to be at a different temperature than you actually are. And that's about how estrogen is important in signaling. It's a key part of the signaling to your brain, not just about your temperature, but about a lot of things. So if we're not taking this into account, that person's not going to be successful with their fitness goals or with any health and well-being goals. And if they're not going to be successful, then you're not going to be successful with whatever your product and services is, whether you in your company or whether you're a doctor or whatever you may be. No one's going to be successful. So I'm now coming at things much more like there's an opportunity here, because the more we understand, the more successful you're likely to be with whatever your product and service is. So just focus on the success. Don't be like, oh God, why is it so different? Why do we not know these things? Do we really have to be bothered about that? Do we really have to worry about, in our market, a woman could be pre-menopause or post-menopause. Does it really make a difference? Hell, yes, it does make a difference. And you should be curious, and you should be wanting to push yourself to understand how and why it makes a difference, and therefore what needs to change with your product and service with regard to that. Because that is how you're going to be successful. Just doing a blanket that every single woman is the same, you're never going to be successful, because it's not going to be, because that's not true, and so you're not going to be effective.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm glad you said that, because it makes me feel a little bit less guilty about something that I've never really kind of publicly shared. But people often ask me why I'm passionate about like women's health, because, maybe it doesn't make sense at first, right? And I'm like, I'm almost kind of not, if I'm being completely honest.
Mm-hmm.
Directly that passionate about women's health. What I'm really passionate about is exercise and nutrition, but exercise in particular, right? And to go one layer deeper, the community, the self-confidence that can give, especially in a group exercise environment, due to, my upbringing and a bunch of other stuff that's not relevant to this point, but that's what I'm really passionate about. And then after PTing for a few years, you start to realize that women have this whole additional set of barriers, like you just described, to exercising, to doing it consistently, to doing certain types and styles, to doing it in a group environment because of potentially, like you were talking about earlier, things like leakage, you might want to do that in a group environment. So there's all of these additional barriers that women face to all of the elements of exercise, different types of exercise, doing it consistently, the style, etc. So it's like, okay, well, if I'm truly passionate about getting everyone, men and women, to exercise more consistently, in particular form a community and have an identity around being someone who exercises, then I can't not be passionate about women's health, because I have to understand all of those hurdles that you as a woman might face that stop you coming on this journey of where I'm trying to get you to. So that is where the passion comes from.
Exactly. And now I love that. I really, really love that. And it makes perfect sense. And actually your own experience and your own passion is a really great overview of how this whole bigger women's health thing is, right from the start when we were talking. You're saying, oh, there are these differences that now act as hurdles for women in fitness. But you see, had women started women's fitness groups, had women started gyms, how women had started weightlifting competitions and everything like this, all of these factors wouldn't be a hurdle, because we would have built around it. It would have been designed by women for women that would enabled women to do it. And so now we'd be having this conversation saying, oh, the equipment in the gym when I'm lifting weights and everything like that, it doesn't really fit me as a man, because I've got these other needs, and that's a real hurdle to me wanting to go to the gym, because I find that, it really hurts because I'm not able to lift the weights properly because it doesn't really fit my size or the way that I move my body or my kind of waist to hip ratio, anything like that. And that's all it is. It's just, and people want to some people want to insinuate that there's so much negativity and bitterness that women have, and I don't have that. I'm just like, please stop pretending and having your eyes shut to the situation is that it was built and designed by men for men with the view that it would just carry over to women, and it just doesn't. And it's just like, no one's got any beef here. No one's like, bringing any angst to the table. We're just started by saying, oh no, there is a difference. Could we just accommodate and make the changes where we need to? And it's not accommodate for women. I definitely don't want that to get out there. It's just accommodate for the differences and make changes. And then it just gets turned into this much bigger thing that, oh, women on such a rampage, and there they go complaining again. And it's just like, I worked in a company that was predominantly male, and I'm talking about like 250 men to 20 women. Oh. And the building had the toilet situation. They had loads and loads of male toilets and urinals, and so basically what I'm talking about is the number of men who could get through the toilets was much quicker, and they had a few female toilets, and I was just like, well, you just need more toilets. Just I'm not making it. I haven't got any angst here, but you've got women here, and we need toilets, and I can't use a urinal, so we need more toilets. And I was just like, and they're like, oh, you're being quite difficult. No, I just need to wee, and you don't have a toilet or enough toilets for that to happen. And that's where I didn't have frustration, but now I have frustration because you're pushing that back in my face. And I'm just like, now you're putting a hurdle in front of me. I was happy to just say there is a difference and we need to make changes. But now you say, oh, I'm being difficult because I've highlighted that there's a difference and something needs to change. That's what gets me frustrated. And so, if you go in through a world and you think, this could, if it had been designed predominantly like women, like it has been designed predominantly by men, if it had been designed predominantly by women, it would be very different. And I'm sure we'd be having the same discussion, but the fact that we'd now be talking about men's health and men's fitness and what the different needs are in men, because there's a difference. There's no bitterness here. It's just that this is the reality we face. And I think that there's so much more that can be done if we just all just kind of took out any negative feelings about it and just said, okay, fine, what do you need so that you're in the workplace and you can stay here longer? Or what do you need that's going to help you when you're experiencing whatever you're experiencing during pregnancy, post-pregnancy, breastfeeding, perimenopause, and I'm just listing some things, but it doesn't all relate to just that. It's just that as a woman going through cancer, as a woman going through diabetes, what are the differences here? And if we just opened our eyes and just looked at how we could do things differently, then you will see productivity and performance, not just in the workplace, but everywhere, in every single corner of everything, you will see it massively increase. And I think we just don't think about that enough.
I think that's a really great segue for something that you've touched on a couple of times, which I love. It's been a common thread on the podcast, is staying curious. And I don't think you've exactly said these words, but that kind of translates into almost being your own scientist, which then takes us onto, for example, menstrual cycle tracking, where it's like, okay, how can you start to be your own scientist? Stay curious, gather data about yourself so that you can obviously best learn your physiology, work with it and potentially in certain situations use that to help advocate for yourself. So yeah, I know that menstrual cycle tracking is something that you're passionate about, and it has a lot of different benefits, and there potentially is a little bit of friction to doing it. So what is menstrual cycle tracking? Why should women consider it? And then maybe let's touch on some of the privacy stuff.
Sure. Yeah, no, as you say, like I'm a big advocate, I suppose, of menstrual cycle tracking, because I think it is, there's no think about it, it is a key sign of our health and well-being as a woman. Just like when you look at then there's lots of medical signs that we look at, the colour of the whites of our eyes, how white they are, the colour of the skin, various other things that we look at. A period for a woman is fundamental to that. And we will talk in gynae. I will talk all the time. When was the last period? When was the last period? And I love all the memes that you see about it. Like, basically, anything could be happening. It's like, okay, she's just come in from a road traffic accident. We're in A&E. She's bleeding out from everywhere. But the gynecologist will be like, so when was your last period, though? I do need to know this. This is critical. And it's like, yeah, we can take it a bit far. But it is a really, really important sign. And it happens, for most women, you will experience periods. It's not something that you only have once in your life. You may have a regular period, you may have an irregular period, you may have a completely erratic period, you may stop, you may start, you're taking hormones, you may be pregnant, whatever. It's an ever-changing situation for sure. But the one thing is what you don't just have one period in your life. So it's not like that time, where you can look back to think, I remember when I had my child. It's happened enough for you to forget how it happens, when it happens, and what it's like. And when you've got such an important part of understanding and meeting a person at the place they are is contingent on knowing about their period. But let's say somebody has a period, you know, roughly like every 4 to 6 weeks, and you're like, okay, so tell me about the last 6 months with your periods. They couldn't, because it's part of their normal life, and that is totally fine, and that's what I would expect it to be. But it's such a critical piece of evidence and understanding that you would need to be able to help and interpret what that woman is then saying, that you're like, you can't just leave that piece of the jigsaw puzzle out so much. Hence the importance of period tracking. Even if you think, some people track their period because the period is the problem. It's very heavy, it's very painful, it's very erratic. They can't get pregnant, or they don't want to get pregnant. There is a thing that the period directly relates to. But also if you're just like, something around your sleep, or something around, you're suffering with joint pains, or, it's not just related to the very much reproductive, gynae specific issues. Periods is a sign around your general health and well-being, and therefore we need to understand that with regard to this. So that's why I'm always like, everyone should be tracking their period, because it's useful. It's useful now, but it's also useful in the future, because when there is something that happens and we can't predict what that can be, and it's not just related to reproductive health. Women are much more than just their reproductive health. But we need to be like, okay, this vital sign we want to understand, because when you're then like, how has your period changed? Oh, I don't really know. I know it's changed, but I don't really know. Okay, fine. Well, if you'd been tracking, that would have really, really helped you to understand. And obviously the other thing is, it can be an early warning sign. It can be an early indicator. It's not just your period, but it's bleeding around your period, in between your periods, bleeding when you shouldn't be bleeding, like after menopause. That's a massive, massive warning sign. It's a real red flag. And so for someone who has got into the rhythm of knowing what they do with regard to their cycles and their bleeds and their their bleeds as in their periods, but also their bleeds when it's not their period, it's vital. So yeah, I'm all up for the knowledge is power, number one. That's how I should have started. Knowledge is power, and therefore tracking your period makes perfect sense.
There's definitely, I feel like, a little bit of a shift happening, albeit I'm very aware I live in a bubble, but there's definitely a bit of a shift happening in my opinion. I had a new potential client reach out, and exactly what you said there was like an early warning sign, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously menstrual dysfunction occurs on a continuum. So, it's healthy, it's slightly less healthy and irregular, and then more stuff goes wrong. So exactly as you said, early warning sign. She actually reached out because she'd noticed in her, I won't say what app she uses because I don't think it was Clue, but she was using a different app. And yeah, I'm joking. And she started noticing over the last 4 months that they'd been becoming a little bit more irregular, longer and longer, kind of towards the 45-day mark. And I was like, that is brilliant that you're trying to catch this early. And there was a lot of stuff once we jumped on the phone call that we could kind of correlate that started happening around that 5-month mark, and then 4 cycles things started changing. So yeah, like early warning prevention is so important. I know it's obviously a different area of the body, a different system, but blood pressure is referred to as the silent killer, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not silent if you just put a cuff on.
Yeah.
Like you're meant, like it's not.
I love the way you say that. That's so true.
It's pretty easy. Like I take it for my clients, or if they don't train first thing in the morning, I give them the cuff. They keep it for a few days. They tell me their blood pressure readings, because the last time they had it done, maybe it was at the doctor's and they were anxious and stressed. I'm like, just take the cuff, do it first thing in the morning.
Exactly.
So it's not silent. It like takes 20 seconds to get an answer, and it's the same with menstrual cycle, dysfunction. Albeit you maybe less likely or not directly going to die from it like you could blood pressure. As you've said, it's still that 5th vital sign. It's really early, an early warning sign of so many things that can go wrong further down the line. So it's like, why is it not just the default that we track it?
Yeah.
But hopefully at some point in the future, it will be the default that women track their cycle.
Yeah, and I think also it helps. It's so much more beneficial with tracking it, as you say, about understanding their body and an early warning sign, or even just recognizing something's changed and why is that changing and what's going on, is to help them achieve other things with regard to contraception or pregnancy as well. I think just all of that encapsulates how empowering it is to a woman, and that, you know, there is definitely my work with Clue. It's really interesting and so thought-provoking to understand the different cultures and to understand the different places where people are at in their lives with regard to their relationships, with regard to the work that they do, the conditions that they're living and working in, etc. And so this is like such a useful bit of information that really empowers a woman. And so we want women to feel as empowered as possible about themselves, and it gives them more control over how they want to, you know, about their decision making around their own body. Physically and mentally and emotionally. And so it's really crucial for that. And I think it also is a stage to be thinking about, yeah, I should recognise that there are differences between me and, let's say, my male partner or my male friends or whoever it is, and realise that we do things differently. And I would just love that people could really think about their cycle and work out when things are good for them and when things are not so good for them, and being more kinder to themselves and understanding how things work. Like, you know, you see, this is completely different, but it does relate. You see people post Christmas and they're like, oh, you've enjoyed yourself, and, you know, that's all just accepted. There's a change in your body because you've maybe not eaten quite as well, or you've just enjoyed yourself a lot more. You've relaxed how you normally eat and the exercise you do, and that's just accepted. And that's a kindness we give ourselves. And yet we don't pay that same kindness of, like, you know, where are you at with regard to yourself and your cycle, and where are you at with regard to your own life, like, you know, being post-birth to being pregnant to being pre-pregnant. They're just miles and miles and miles apart. And you know, we kind of just say, right, well, I've just delivered a baby yesterday. You know, I've just given birth to my baby yesterday, so now I'm just pre-pregnancy again. Why is things not working the same way as they need to do? You know, and my daughter actually asked the other day, she said to me, oh, Mummy, you know, when I watch programs and films and stuff, women who are pregnant are always talking about why they've got swollen ankles. Why have they got swollen ankles? And so I kind of went into explaining the biology behind that, the physiology and stuff. And then I explained, like, you know, then when you give birth, this is the changes that happens and this is the kind of timeline. She's like, you know, I never knew that. And I thought, yeah, and you'll grow up thinking that when you gave birth, you'll just be like that. And your biology would just change back to that. And it's just... no, it won't be. There's just such a lack of understanding there. And so if people are tracking their period just as a beginning, I'm not saying that's the be all and end all, I'm just saying that's a great thing to start with, then you can understand more about how women's bodies work, but then also how does your body work? And if you can understand your body, then you can build when you're ready to build, whether that would be physically, mentally or emotionally, and you can also rest and relax and recharge when you need to do that. And I definitely feel in my time, people talk about being older and being more experienced and you know what to do in your job a bit more. That's just because you understand yourself more. And that's all I'm saying. Let's just apply that to simple biology. If I understand myself more, I know when to do what I need to do.
Yeah, I love that answer. One of the most common bits of feedback I get when I'm kind of working with a female client for 3+ months is how nice it is to just know that sometimes when things are not going quite as well for them, or they feel a little bit more irritable or anxious or whatever it might be, they can go, oh, okay, I never knew that was the same point in my cycle. And with a few maybe relatively small changes in terms of, you know, differences to maybe social commitments or workouts or just being kind to yourself, a few very small changes then go a massively long way in terms of being proactive once you've collected a few months of your own cycle data.
Exactly. Perfect. I mean, that's great use of it. And then also the other side is just going, I know when I've got loads of energy. Yeah. I know when I sleep really well. I know when I've got loads of energy. So what I'm going to conquer it and I'm going to plan accordingly. And, you know, I think, again, it does come back to this difference that, you know, I don't think I might say I've been with my husband for nearly 20 years. And I always he's so on a level. There is no real change in his moods. And it's amazing. And he's got one brother, and he's just like, obviously, I would like to say this is the longest relationship he's had. I don't think he's had another 20-year relationship. That would make him very old.
Wouldn't add up.
No, it wouldn't. And he's just like, to really understand all these phases in your life. He said that's the biggest thing that, you know, when we talk about it, because obviously we talk about women's health, because he's not medical at all, but I just, you know, say this is all we're going to talk about. He doesn't get a choice, exactly. And, you know, he's got 2 daughters. So he's really motivated to understand this for sure. And he's just like, to understand, you know, just the kind of cyclical nature of things from a month to a month, but also understand from a year to a year, to also understand you pre-pregnancy, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, you know, and now going into perimenopause, being in perimenopause, for sure. Like it's understanding all those different phases of the life. And then I say to him, but what phases have you gone through? And it's just not like that for me. And I'm like, no. And it's not that I'm better or I'm more special than he is, or vice versa. It's different. And it's understanding that those are the differences. And I think it's a difficult time now to talk about differences between men and women. But I still just go, but ultimately I can't change science, and that's why I love science. It is reproducible. It is evidence-based. There are differences here, and we need to stop burying our head in the sand and just damn well get on with sorting them out.
Do you think this is a question that's probably super loaded and maybe isn't appropriate for the end, kind of towards the end of a podcast? But I've kind of always had this question in my mind, and what you've said there is just kind of reminded me of it. And this is like not a rhetorical question, you know. Probably a little bit too young and not
a bit worried
really
about what you're
not really in that. No, don't be worried about it. But I get that it's a bit of a loaded question. But I genuinely don't really have an opinion on this. I'm genuinely very curious. Do you feel like potentially pro equal rights, like pro feminism, men and women are equal, has almost been part of the problem, kind of caused some of these issues, because there are so many differences, which, as you said, are not better or worse or right or wrong. They are just different. And do you think that maybe pushing for there are no differences, everything should be equal, has potentially affected this?
Yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from, and I do think about it a lot. I think I haven't decided. I don't know enough to know whether that is a factor. I wouldn't be surprised if it is a factor, for sure. But I think the more I do in the health space, and the more that I work with so many different people, and right back, as I said at the start, I really don't come across these people who've got a massive vendetta. I've come across people where there's a miscommunication. And I definitely think, you know, the one thing, I've done so many different jobs, and the one thing that is a constant with what I do in the jobs I do, a big thing is I'm a translator, and I can understand where different people are coming from, not just on a personal level, but on a professional level. And if that's what you need, what is the information you need out of this? What's critical for you to be able to take this here? And so a lot of that is translation. And I think taking on that role, you realise that a lot, coming back to your question, has been a miscommunication. When we talk about feminism, when we talk about equal rights, when we talk about things, for example, equal pay, a lot gets lost in translation around how does that affect, you know, productivity and performance in the workplace, and it all gets bundled up, and it's just like, oh, this is all very difficult and we can't really talk about it. And actually it needs to be separated out, and being like, you know, 2 people, a man and a woman, doing the same job at the same standard with the, you know, all of that, if everything's the same, they need to be paid equally, for sure. We know that, and that is in legislation. But, you know, if a woman is if there is a gender pay gap and not enough women are able to reach senior roles, that needs to be looked into, and health and well-being, and the differences in health and well-being, and how that has been managed within a workplace in a good or in a bad way, or usually a mixed way, needs to be incorporated into that. And so there is overlap, but one is not equal to the other by any means. But I think that I just find it mind-boggling that if you've got somebody who is capable, why would you not try to enable them to reach their full capability? and I sit there and watch F1. My family absolutely love F1, and I watch the fine detail and attention that is put to what seemingly, from an outsider's perspective, and this is probably going to be outrageous, but seemingly small bits, because I don't fully understand everything. But I'm like, wow, this attention to detail is immense. The standards that you are going to are so high. The rigour that you apply is incredible. And I can appreciate that. I don't fully understand it, but I can appreciate that. And it's all because you are maximising and optimising every single bit of this person's performance. Okay? The car's performance, this person's performance. And I get it. So why do we not apply that to everybody in a workplace? That I find mind-boggling. Why do you want to, going back in, say, we recognise there's hurdles, but we're not going to do anything about that? Why? What's the point? What is the point? There is no point there. But there is a lot of resistance. But there's always resistance to change. There's always resistance to things that make sense. And that's just life. And that goes back to behavioural science. And I'm sure somebody can explain why is there resistance to change, but it's not a new notion by any means. And that's just where we're in. We're just right in the trenches at the moment with it, with the resistance. And, I'm happy to a point to explain it, but I will only explain it to people who are happy and interested to learn. And if they don't, then they'll lag behind. And, we'll be where we're going to be. I have no doubt about it. And, the people who didn't want to come on board will come on board at some point. I've done enough change behaviours in my, projects in my life. They will come on board, but they'll always be the ones that are the outliers. And that's fine, because they're not having a significant impact in the overall direction going forward. So I think it's best to work out who do you need on board and who's not worth it, and then move forward like that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I know it was a bit of a loaded question, but the more throughout this episode you kept saying there's differences, and you just kept saying it, the more I had to be like, I'd have to ask this question.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously lots of nuance, lots of context. We've got a few minutes left, and I'd love to save plenty of time for people to find out more about yourself and the work that you're doing, and where they can find out about your services. So just to kind of round off menstrual cycle tracking in kind of maybe like a bit of a tick list format, is there any other questions that people typically ask you, any other points that you want to communicate, any kind of objections that you have to doing it that you'd like to kind of quick fire go through, so that someone can feel really informed about how and why they should start doing that if they're not already?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So there's lots of options out there around how to do your menstrual tracking. And ultimately, from what I understand from people who use different apps, is that people just get, like any app, they get on an app and they work out whether they like it or not. And so I think that that's a very good rule of thumb, and you shouldn't look into it any more than that, really. Choose what you like and use, and then that's going to be effective for you. But I think there is one serious consideration, is that when you're signing up to these apps, definitely look at the kind of consent. You should be giving consent so that they can collect your data and potentially use your data. And so I know the whole terms and conditions that look really tiny, and typically I know I do it for lots of apps like tick box, yeah, it's all fine. But I think you should be, it's good practice just for yourself, because it is data that's personal to you. Look at what's actually written in those consents, and so that you're fully aware of, as you mentioned, the privacy, how this data is stored, how it's used. Are you happy to be part of it? And also, there's lots of things where these apps are doing collaborations with other parties, pharma, for example, university institutions, other academic organisations, and they're always interested in, would you be happy for your data to be used in a research? And some people aren't, and that's absolutely fine, but some people are. So please do look into that, because it's worth taking the time to say, what are you happy with? And if you're happy with something, then do tick what you're happy with. And if you're not happy, make sure you're doing the right bit with regard to the tick boxing, because it'd be such a shame if you'd signed up to something and you weren't happy with what was happening. But equally, it'd be just as much as a shame, really, is that if you were happy for some data to be shared for research and you weren't ticked up, signed up for that. So that would always be my kind of little just thought around this, is do have a look around at the different apps and see what suits you, but do make sure that you really look in detail around the consent.
Yeah, awesome. No, really, really great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. From anything that we've been through today, which obviously has been quite a lot, is there anything that you're now thinking, oh, I wish I'd added that point or rounded that off with something?
No, I think it's all good.
Amazing. Yeah, there was so much there. That was incredible. But
oh, good.
Let's just go into where people can find out a little bit more about your work, your services. Obviously, you offer a few like private services now, so there might be some people interested in hearing more about those. So
yeah, definitely. So I have my own company, MFG Health Consulting. You can just Google me and find me. I have a website, but I'm mainly on socials with regard to LinkedIn and Instagram. And, you know, I do a lot around really in women's health, as you know, education, innovation and implementation. So anyone who's doing anything across those fields or wants a bit more advice or interest with regard to that, if they're wanting somebody to help with that in any way, please do reach out. I'd love to speak to you.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't recommend Michelle's work enough. So definitely consider that if you're in this space. Your kind of zoomed out approach to, we've obviously got the medical background, worked in women's space, but now, as you've already explained, kind of looking a little bit more and like, okay, how can businesses and maybe tech in particular try and speed up this long lag time that we have so that ultimately we can move this forward. That's a really interesting space. So you've got obviously a very unique ability to kind of look at both those worlds, and therefore I'm sure some people will be looking to reach out for your consultancy services.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I know you've got so much on at the moment, so to take kind of a couple of hours out your day to travel down from Cambridge, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, can't appreciate that enough. For anyone listening that has took something from that, which is obviously going to be everyone, please do feel free to let Michelle know if you've got any questions or if you've got any feedback, because obviously the round trip plus the podcast, that's a big commitment. So make sure you let Michelle know if you enjoyed today's episode. And thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me. I've had a great time. Really enjoyed it.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, it would be amazing if you could do us a massive favour and leave us a review and even if possible a comment. The reason why this is so useful for us is it allows us to know which type of content and which guests are best going to be relevant for you and your goals, so that we can continue to make the podcast even better for you in the future. Thank you so much so far for all of your support on the Women's Wellness Show.